Representative Ilhan Omar, DMN, wrongly referred to Gaza as occupied in a tweet supporting Palestinian terrorists against Israel on Sunday, as hundreds of rockets were fired at Israeli civilian population centers, killing 4 Israelis. Omar, who supports the anti-Israel boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS, movement, and who has a long history of anti-Semitic rhetoric relating to the issue, weighed in on the conflict Sunday, calling it a cycle of violence but clearly blaming Israel. The protesters to which Omar refers were shot at because they were trying to breach the border fence and were using incendiary devices, among other weapons. In the past, such protests were organized by the Hamas terror organization, which violently suppresses protests against its own brutal regime in Gaza, according to the UN. Among Omar's many dubious claims in a single tweet, one false claim stands out, namely, that Gaza faces a status quo of occupation. In 2005, Israel unilaterally removed every Israeli soldier and civilian from Gaza, ending any possible occupation of the territory, against much domestic political opposition within Israel itself. The hope was that Palestinians would use the withdrawal as an opportunity to invest in Gaza's economy and work towards peace. Instead, Hamas, which took over Gaza in a 2007 coup against the Palestinian Authority government, turned Gaza into a terrorist launch pad, using civilian areas in the territory to launch rockets at Israeli cities, and digging tunnels to infiltrate into Israeli territory and kidnap Israeli soldiers, successfully, in the case of Gilad Shalit in 2006. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, DCA, appointed Omar in January to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and has refused to remove her from that post despite repeated anti-Semitic comments and misstatements of basic facts. A weightlifting league has revoked awards to a transgender weightlifter who claimed to have broken several women's weightlifting records. Our rules, and the basis of separating genders for competition, are based on physiological classification rather than identification, said a statement from Paul Bosey, president of 100% Raw Powerlifting Federation. Bosey continued. On the basis of all information presented to the board of directors for this particular case, the conclusion made is that the correct physiological classification is male, since the lifter's gender classification for the purpose of our rules is not consistent with female. No female records will be broken by these lifts. The biology-based reversal was largely ignored by leading transgender activists, partly because few voters believe the transgender ideology's claim that sexual discrimination, not biology, explains the different physical strength of men and women. Instead, leading transgender activists loudly argued that racism helps to explain the exclusion of South African runner Caster Semenya from women's athletic competitions. Semenya is not transgender but is a very rare intersex person who has male genes and internal male sexual organs and, therefore, a much higher level of testosterone than female athletes. On May 1, an international sports authority conditionally excluded her from competitions because of her testosterone advantage. In response, Chase Stringio, an advocate at the ACLU tweeted, "TERF means transgender exclusionary radical feminists, and it is aimed at women who say biology determines whether a person is a man or a woman, not a person's feelings of gender identity. Transgender activists say a person's sex should be determined by his or her gender identity." The transgender weightlifter, Mary Gregory, had touted the apparent wins on April 28 and 29. Prior to the competition, managers at the 100% Raw Powerlifting had been developing a policy that would survive lawsuits by transgender activists. On Facebook, Bosey described how Gregory's weightlifting awards were revoked. On Friday, April 26, I received a phone call from a meet director letting me know that we might possibly have a transgender lifter competing on Saturday, April 27 at the USA Master Nationals. I asked if this lifter had stated anything to him in regards to being a transgender lifter and the meet director indicated no. I asked what category was checked off on the entry form and he stated female. I informed him to let her lift as it would be more insulting to ask a lifter such a personal question, especially if the lifter did not offer to disclose this information. On Saturday, April 27, the lifter exceeded the current female world records in this lifter's age and weight category. This automatically calls for a drug testing protocol which takes place at the end of every event. The drug testing coordinator for this event performed the drug test, at which time it was revealed that this female lifter was actually a male in the process of becoming a transgender female. On Monday, April 29, the president and the board of directors met to discuss this matter. As an aside, the board of directors has been working on a transgender policy. This new policy had not been completed prior to this event occurring. Everyone has commented on the posts that this lifter posted on their Instagram page. It is very unfortunate that the news media, social media and so many others have made comments before the true facts could be released. Facts: 1. The lifter identifies as female, and so entered the contest, with no prior consultation with the meet director or 100% raw officials. Our rules, and the basis of separating genders for competition, are based on physiological classification rather than identification. On the basis of all information presented to the board of directors for this particular case, the conclusion made is that the correct physiological classification is male. 2. Since the lifter's gender classification for the purpose of our rules is not consistent with female, no female records will be broken by these lifts. 3. The lifter was uncontested during the event, therefore no female lifters were denied a place finish. The lifter will be placed in a different category once the transgender division is introduced with a new policy. 4. Drug testing results have not been completed and will take about another week to come back from the lab. As a drug test failure invalidates the lifts, we will need to wait for the results of the drug tests to determine if the lifts can be counted at all under our current set of rules. Several ordinary Americans are forming organizations to protect sports from the transgender ideology. They include Beth Stelzer, founder of Save Women's Sports, and Jennifer Bryson, founder of Let All Play. Not one of the more than 20 candidates for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in 2020 tweeted this past weekend about the nearly 700 rockets that Palestinian terrorists in Gaza launched against Israel over 2 days. A ceasefire between Hamas, the Palestinian terror organization that controls the Gaza Strip, and Israel went into effect Monday morning. But in the nearly 2 days since the Palestinian attacks started, killing 4 Israelis, not one Democrat saw fit to comment on social media about the subject, and there are scant signs any commented elsewhere. Breitbart News reviewed the Twitter feeds of every Democratic presidential candidate and found no comments about the situation in Gaza and Israel. However, more than half a dozen did tweet Ramadan wishes at the start of the annual Muslim holy month. The Muslim community in the Swedish municipality of Viraaaaall has increased so dramatically, according to local leaders, that they are now planning to build a giant mosque to hold at least 1,000 people, possibly with the help of foreign backers in the Middle East. Local Imam Ismail Abul said that the current mosque, the Viraaaaall Muslim Foundation, which was founded around 15 years ago, is simply not big enough to house the growing number of worshippers in the area, local Tidningen reports. When we celebrate that Ramadan is over and in connection with the trip to Mecca there can be up to 2,000 people who come to the mosque, then we have had to use the old Focus Park or be outdoors, Abul said. The Imam added that the new mosque would be a mix of traditional and modern architecture and would feature a prominent minaret, as well. Last year the Muslim community was able to get permission from local authorities to broadcast the call to prayer publicly, despite opposition from the populist Sweden Democrats who voiced their concerns saying, prayer announcements in public places and in foreign languages are not part of Swedish society. Imam Abul admitted that so far the community has not sought out the proper planning permission from the government to build the mosque but said he was hopeful it would be built by around 2025. We may be able to get help from rich Arab countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or the United Arab Emirates. A Muslim considers it a good thing to help other Muslims build a mosque where there is no mosque, he said. We have had contacts with those countries about this. We have not received any promises, but there are people there who are willing to help with money to build the mosque, he added. Foreign funding of mosques has become a hotly debated topic in several European countries that are currently seeking to ban foreign-funded imams and mosques due to the often more radical forms of Islam that follow them. French President Emmanuel Macron has suggested a ban on foreign funding, and in Germany, the government has considered a mosque tax to allow Muslims to give their tax money directly to domestic Muslim associations. Representative Viraaaaall, Demi, tweeted an attack on Israel on Sunday even as Palestinian terrorists fired hundreds of rockets at Israeli civilians, bringing the death toll to 4, including, ironically, a Muslim Arab citizen of Israel. Viraaall was responding to, and agreeing with, anti-Israel activist Youssef Munayyor, who had criticized a New York Times headline that read, Gaza militants fire 250 rockets, and Israel responds with airstrikes. The Times evidently prefers to avoid the word terrorists when dealing with Palestinians who murder Israelis, that was unacceptable to Munayyor, who complained that Israel had started the violence by shooting unarmed Palestinian protesters in Gaza. The protesters were attacking Israel's border, some burned tires and threw rocks and incendiary devices, and some attempted to sabotage the border fence, UPI reported. Previous protests have been organized by the Hamas terror group, which, according to the United Nations, violently suppresses actual protests against its violent rule in Gaza. Still, Viraaaaall, describing the fact that Palestinians had sparked the present conflict meant dehumanizing them. When will the world stop dehumanizing our Palestinian people who just want to be free? Headlines like this and framing it in this way just feeds into the continued lack of responsibility on Israel, who unjustly oppress and target Palestinian children and families, she tweeted. She concluded with #Free Palestine, a slogan usually used in connection with the destruction of Israel, an ambition that Viraaall shares with Hamas and other Palestinian radicals. The Palestinian terror groups firing rockets at Israel evidently hoped that a massive barrage of projectiles would overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system. 4 Israeli civilians were, in fact, killed by rockets, including a Muslim Arab Israeli who was killed after he was critically injured in his chest by shrapnel from a direct strike on a factory in Ashkelon, according to the Jerusalem Post. Israel has struck Palestinian terrorist targets in response. Unlike Palestinian terrorists, who have a long history of both targeting civilians in Israel and hiding behind civilians in Gaza, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, target terrorists and try to avoid civilian casualties on both sides of the conflict. The first Palestinian American woman in Congress, has been celebrated by other Democrats, including former President Barack Obama, who told me personally, "I'm proud of you," during a meeting with freshman Democrats. Also has close ties to other Palestinian radicals, including Palestinian activist Samar Abdel Khader, a fundraiser and campaigner for Viraaall in 2018 who spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories online, including Holocaust denial. Viraaall has also used anti-Semitic language to describe American politicians who support Israel, and once reportedly wrote an op-ed for anti-Semite Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan's website, among numerous other radical connections.